Apple, Apple, Apple. You've done it. You've convinced me. And Apple might be trying to convince you too. You've said that me, the end user, as an Intel long-standing 16-inch MacBook Pro user, it's time for me to upgrade. And in this video, we're going to explore that journey as we compare the differences between this device and the new MacBook Pro 14-inch. This one here is the MacBook Pro with the M3 Pro CPU, 18 gig of RAM, 512 gig SSD. 4 years ago, this thing cost me 3,150 Australian dollars, and 4 years today, this device cost me $3,150. Did I get ripped? Is it worth it? We're going to find out, and the findings are extremely interesting. So I'd really recommend you hang out and see what the results are, because I was extremely impressed just from my first impressions. Now, disclaimer, as a MacBook Pro 16-inch user, this device here has served me to this point in time fantastically. Yes, cheeky Apple, since the update, it's a little bit slower than it used to be, but right now, for having 20 Chrome tabs open, working with photos, working with videos, doing work on it, taking it outside, using it, traveling with it, it still works excellently. But 4 years have gone by, and I think it's time to upgrade. So let's get into this video. The top lids have slightly changed because the Apple logo is a little bit bigger. One of the other major differences was on the color. This new space gray, which is what I would call it because it's definitely not space black. This is the original space gray color. And as you guys can see, you know, in certain lights, I don't know, it's not a huge difference, but it does look nicer in this color than the old one, in my opinion. One thing I did notice straight away was that the casing for the screen on this newer MacBook is a little bit thicker. And as you can see, it doesn't have much play when you're tapping on it. Where the old one is a bit thinner, but look at how much flexibility it has in use. And that was the first thing I noticed with this MacBook, the old one when I bought it, was that the display felt a little bit flimsy. So taking a look at the right side, you can see that the new MacBook Pro has a HDMI port and SD card now, with only one Thunderbolt out, which for me is fantastic. But you'll notice that the headphone jack from the right side of the laptop on the old one has now been moved to the other side. Looking to the left side of the laptops, you'll see that the MagSafe has finally been brought back, which is fantastic for traveling, but I tend to use the USB-C for charging anyway. You've got the headphone jack now around this side rather than on the other side. And on the back, it's still the same, nothing's really changed. The other major difference is that the touch bar is gone, being replaced with the normal set of keys on the newer MacBook. It was a nice feature, but I never really got the full benefit out of it, in my opinion. Obviously on the 16-inch, the trackpad is a little bit larger than the one on the 14-inch, giving you a bit more real estate to navigate around the operating system, and that's another difference that I found. In terms of the amount of space for typing, as you can see, I can rest my hands pretty well on the 14-inch, and my palms aren't touching the trackpad. Where with the 16-inch you have a bit more wider setup, but doesn't seem to be too much of a difference between the two. Looking at the differences between the two screens, definitely the older display had a more washed out grey look on the blacks, where the new one has a much darker tone, which is obviously due to the new technology being used. And there is a brightness and contrast difference between them, but the old screen is still really good. So let's go through some of this amazing data that I've put together. What I've done is I've ran the computers in normal power mode and low power mode, both the Intel and the Apple Silicon 14-inch. Using Geekbench, I've basically tested both single core and multi-core performance while monitoring some of the power draw, temperature averages, and clock speed to really compare how much of a difference there is between the two. And this is where things get really interesting. So you'll see in normal power mode, in single score benchmarks, the Intel scored 1357, where the MacBook with the Apple Silicon scored 3011, so 221% increase. With multi-core, it was similar, where the Apple Silicon scored 255% higher. But this is the stuff that gets really interesting. The power draw to achieve these results
is 4 times less, which is absolutely mental and way cooler. But what I found more interesting was the fact that if you run it in low power mode, you'll see here that the Intel device scores obviously less, and so does the M3 Pro. But even in low power mode, using 5 to 15 watts of power, and at a slower gigahertz, the new processor is still scoring nearly double the performance of the old Intel in normal power mode. And this device here wasn't any slouch, like it performed completely well for most of the stuff that I was doing, which is quite amazing that in that comparative CPU difference, you're getting a huge amount of performance extra at a huge reduced amount in power draw, which means obviously better battery life, which we'll touch on in a second, cooler temperatures. This is a huge upgrade, 250% performance on average. I also wanted to check the graphical performance of this device versus the Intel one, just to see how much of a difference there is there. So again, in normal power mode versus low power mode, using the Geekbench GPU testing, I tested both Metal and OpenCL. You'll see that the i7 scored 33,000 and the Apple Silicon scored 69,000. So again, a 208% increase. And OpenCL, 169%. And it also was drawing just slightly less power than the old Radeon 5300 setup, which is not huge, but obviously the performance gains are there. But what I found more interesting was if you put the new M3s into low power mode, there doesn't seem to be any major reduction in the draw on the graphics card, or the graphics component of the CPU, I should say. It's still drawing around 5 to 15 watt, and the scores are pretty much reflective of that, showing that low power mode doesn't seem to be making much of a difference on the GPU side. While obviously on the Intel it did, but this is still crazy. Like, this is still 200% increase in graphical performance, where the old graphics card was fine for most stuff. And obviously when I started these tests, both of the Intel and MacBook Pros were at 100% battery life. And after doing all the tests, the actual Apple Silicon is at 52% battery life, and the Intel is at 17%. And bear in mind, this is a 16-inch. Obviously, there's been a little bit of degradation over time because I've used the device. But you can see that around the power draw, it does impact battery life quite significantly. So it's something really, really cool that Apple have done here, which is really, really impressive.
So was it worth it? Well, from my first impressions, it looks like that this device is a significant upgrade over the old Intel CPU. However, going from a 16-inch, and this is my thought process and yours might be a little bit different, the 14-inch form factor for me is, I would believe, going to be more suited to what I'm using it for. The reason why I say that is the tasks that I do normally, which involve a bigger screen, the MacBook Pro is connected behind me. That's a 38-inch Dell. And in reality, when I took my MacBook with me, the tasks that I were doing were single app usages. So the display being bigger didn't really benefit me for the size difference and portability of what this can offer. The other thing is as well that this device right now, the older model, can be sold for about 1,800 Australian dollars. So that means I'm losing about 1,200 to 1,400 Australian dollars owning this machine for 4 years. So for $1,400, this seems to be a really good upgrade. It's only cost me $1 a day to use this machine for the past 4 years. So I hope this video provided some insights to my experience upgrading so far in my first impressions. If you've made it this far, leave a comment below and say to me if you want a review, because I'm definitely going to use this device a little bit more before I give my last impressions of it. Thank you for watching. Peace be with you, and I'll see you guys in another video shortly.